Hello, this is Mel. I'm back with you on the overhaul of a 2006 Dodge Ram automatic transmission. Designation is 48RE, and we have already had the first video which showed the complete tear down of the transmission. Today we're going to go through each sub-assembly, do an inspection on it, and see what kind of parts we need to order for it. So the very first thing we're going to do is our front pump, and we'll get started with that right now. Okay, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to pull out our torque converter seal, which sits in the front of the front pump housing. So I've already broken it loose, so it's just going to be a matter of pulling it up. And we'll be replacing this seal. It'll come in our seal kit. So I'm just going to put it over here to the side. Now we're going to flip it over. And you're going to remove this gasket, which we'll be replacing as well. Will come in our overhaul kit. And now we're going to pull out the 6 bolts in it. And just so you'll know, I'll show you a little bit about it. You've got this vent area here that vents the pump, so you need to be careful with it, that it's tight in there and secure, and making sure that there's nothing wrong and it's clear. So you'll do a blow it out with your air gun. Okay, let's pull these bolts out. And that's going to let your front face drop out. We're going to separate the two sides. I'll pull this up. Inside you have your inner and your outer gear assembly. That's what does the pumping in the transmission. You notice your 2 tabs that the torque converter goes into, and then you've got a bushing on the inside here. So we'll be inspecting all those in just a few minutes, and we're going to set it to the side, and we're going to take a look at the sealing rings right here. We're going to remove these 2 sealing rings as they will be replaced. There's 2 metal sealing rings. And one more here. Kind of walk them out. And then you got your washer that sits on the base of it. Also, you've got another bushing inside here. Need to inspect that. That bushing looks pretty good. Don't see much wear in it. And next we will go to the gear assembly and make our inspections on it. We're going to swap the stator assembly and the pump body in order for me to show you a couple of things on the pump body. Not sure if you can see it or not, but there's a little dot right here on the outer gear, and then there's a little dot right here on the inner gear. So you want to be sure and make a note of those 2 dots and where they're at, and when you reinstall them in the pump body, you want those to be in the up direction. Now sometimes this inner gear will have a dot on both sides of it. So what I do is I normally would just take a marker and I'll mark the inner gear and that dot right there, so I'll be sure and know in case there is a dot on the other side of which one is supposed to go up. Okay, we have some measurements that we need to make on the gears to make sure that they are in tolerance and able to be reused. I have my straight edge sitting here on top of the gears, and I have the book here that I'm going to read the specifications out of, and we will check each measurement to make sure that it falls within the specification. Okay, the first one is the outer gear to the body face. Our specification is 0.0004 to 0.0025. Okay, so we're going to choose a 0.0025, which is the maximum amount that it could be out, and we're going to see if it will go under there. As a matter of fact, the specification for the inner gear and the outer gear is the same for this, so we'll just go ahead and measure both of them. This is the inner gear. Okay, the feeler gauge will not go under it. This is your maximum amount that it could be out, will not go under it. So both of those are okay. So we're going to put the 2.5 back, and we're going to drop down to a 2/1000 and see if it will go. Okay, on the inner gear, the 0.0025 does go. I'm sorry, the 0.002 will go, but the 0.0025 will not. So both of those, the inner and the outer gear to the body face, are within tolerance. Now another specification we have to check is we're going to check the outer gear to right in here, which is the pump body. Now the specification on that is between 0.004 to 0.009, which is 4 to 9/1000. Okay, we're going to start with the 4 and see if it will go in there. It does. So that's the minimum on the clearance. I'm going to jump up to a 0.006, 6/1000. The 6/1000 does go in there. Going to go to a 7/1000. Okay, it's getting pretty tight now, but the 7/1000 will still go in there. Going to try 8. 8/1000. I can actually force the 8 in there, but I'm having to take a lot of pressure. 9/1000 is the maximum amount, and I cannot get that one in there at all, even by forcing it. So all of these measurements that we have taken are within the specifications to be able to reuse that gear over again. Here I have the planetary gear train set up, so we're going to disassemble it and take a look at our planetaries. Turn it over this way. So I can lock that up a little bit. Okay. Right here on the end we have a snap ring that we're going to take a pair of snap ring pliers and see if we can take that off. Just expand that and it snaps right off. Okay, the planetary set is right here. I'll be able to pull it off of the shaft, just like that. We have a thrust washer with tabs on it that will sit in here. Tabs sit in the holes, which goes on the bottom side of the planetary gear. Okay, so we're going to take that off and sit it right here. We're going to take our planetary setup out of the housing, and we have another thrust washer in here with tabs on it too, which sit down like that right there. Okay, so we're going to take a look at the internal gears. Make sure that there's no damage, no chips out of the gears. They all look to be in pretty good shape. The surface where the thrust rings go look good. Okay, I'm going to set that to the side. Going to take a look at the gear set itself. We have 2, 4, 6 gears in there. You want to spin them, every one of them around. Check it for looseness. Look at the gears, see what they look like. Make sure there's no unusual wear. I'm going to do that for each gear. Okay, they all seem to look pretty good. Okay. Rest of the gear train out. Set this over here. And we'll take a look at the other we'll have 2, 4, 6 gears in these. And another thrust washer. You want to be sure and look at all the teeth and everything, all the gears. Everything looks to be in pretty good shape. And then on the shaft, you want to look at all the teeth in each one of these. All the lands where the races or the bushes run, make sure that they're smooth. No gouges. Check both ends. There's a bushing that goes around here. It all looks real good. This is our tail housing assembly, which inside has the overdrive unit. So we're going to disassemble it at this time. And the first thing we're going to do is remove this plate right here, which has the snap ring inside of it that goes around the rear bearing. So we're going to take this off. You've got, the size is a T25 Torx bit to remove these. So we'll just take them out. Okay, so we'll remove these 2 screws. Pull up the cover. Got a gasket underneath that. Get the gasket off. And then underneath is where you have your snap ring to remove from the rear bearing. I turn the tail shaft housing around a little bit, and we're going to start to remove the components from the inside. You have a wire ring that goes right around here, so it's real easy to come out. You can push it with your hand and you pull that out, and that is what holds the clutch pack in. So next we're going to see if we can remove the clutch pack. So let's take a look at our clutches and our steels for the overdrive unit. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 discs. And we'll be replacing all of the clutches, but the steels looking pretty good. Next we're going to come in here and remove the snap ring assembly that's holding the assembly in. Okay. We've got another snap ring. We've got both the rings out. Now we're going to stand it up and release the snap ring around the bearing. So you need a good pair of hands. And as you can see, it pops right out. We're going to pull the tail shaft up. And off of the overdrive assembly. This is your rear bearing. This is the groove where the snap ring was released from. I have mounted my overdrive assembly into my press. You need to have some special tools in order to compress this spring, which according to my book is about 800 pounds of force. So that is a very dangerous amount of pressure, so you need to be very careful when you're doing this step, and you need to have the proper tools to do it with. So I've got it mounted up in here, and I'm going to bring the press down to where it compresses this, and it will show me, once it compresses, it will make us able to take the spring out that's in here and then the spring out that's in here. We're going to have to take off both spring snap rings in order to disassemble it at the same time. So as you can see, it's going down right here. There's some space in there. And now that it's compressed, I'm going to take a tool and see if I can get the snap rings out. Okay. Just walk it out and around. And then I've got a wire type snap ring here. And now we'll release the pressure off of it in order to be able to get the clutches out. Okay, so all the pressure is off of it now. And I get my snap ring out. Take the clutches out. We have clutches and steels. I'm going to count the clutch plates. There's 10 friction plates. Put them to the side. I'll pull up the gear. And as you can see, there's a spring. And that's why this is so dangerous. You need to be very careful as you're doing this operation. Up inside first. Next is your gear assembly. Got a thrust washer, bearing on that side. And then we got our planetary down in there. So I'm going to move this all back over to the table and we'll finish taking it apart there. I brought the remaining part of the overdrive assembly over to my vise and put it up in the vise. I think it'll be a little bit easier to work on that way. Next, down inside here you have the overdrive planet assembly, planet gear. So I'm going to reach down in here and pull them out. So we're going to inspect it, making sure that there's no problem with any of the gears. See anything missing from them? Look in good shape. This one is a 2, 4, 6 gear planet. We'll put it over here. Following that, we have 2 snap rings in here, wire type, one on top and one on the bottom of the internal ring gear. So we're going to pull the snap ring out. That's the top one. Okay, I'm going to take the snap ring pliers again and I'm going to go down in there and see if I can grab the roller bearing clutch assembly and pull it out. Okay. So there are the inner race for the bearings. And we have a thrust washer. And bearing assembly that is left in there. So I'm going to just put these together here, keeping everything in the same order that it came out. So that completes the disassembly of the overdrive unit, and we're ready to put it over on the bench with the other components. The last thing we'll be going through is our valve body, and I have it laid out here. And first thing we're going to talk about is the bolts that hold the valve body into the transmission case. There are 3 different lengths of bolts. The smaller lands take the shortest bolt, and you have 3 of them. I'm going to lay them out together. And then you have a taller area of the valve body that has 3 bolts in it. So we're going to take them out. Those 3 are the same length. And then the ones that are in the governor assembly are the longest bolts. And there are 4 of them. and they are all the same length. So you've got 3 different length bolts. You need to lay them out or either mark them so you'll know how they go back in. Then we're going to flip the valve body over. And we're going to pull the park rod into the farthest position. That gives you a little clearance to go inside here to get the clip off of it, the E-clip. So we're going to turn it back over now that we've got that pulled open. And we're going to go in here with our screwdriver and see if we can pop off the E-clip. Comes off just like that. And then it's gonna let us take the complete parking rod out. Don't lose your E-clip. Keep all those parts together. Okay, we're gonna spin this back around. Next, we're gonna remove the plate that holds the governor and the governor pressure switch into position. It has a Torx bit. So we're going to remove that now. And that is a T25 Torx bit as well. This plate right here also holds the pressure switch in place. So we'll need to kind of prise up on this a little bit to get this out. So there you have the plate. I'm going to put our 2 screws back in it that we took out, two Torx screws, keeping all of them together so we'll know how it goes back together. Now we can remove the governor and the governor pressure switch. So in order to remove the pressure switch, you just pull straight out on it. It has a seal around it. And we'll be replacing these. We'll replace all the electronics in the valve body when we go back together with it. Now we've got to pull the wiring harness loose from the governor solenoid. You just lift up on this little tab right here and it pulls straight out. And we have a little strainer area, a seal, and then a larger seal. Put those to the side. Now with all the bolts out of it, we should be able to take the governor housing off at this time. The governor housing a lot of times will be stuck on there a little bit, so I just take a little plastic hammer and give it a little tap. That'll break it loose. Now you can remove the governor body. And the gasket. We're going to check both of these surfaces against warpage as well, because sometimes these can warp and that will cause problems with leakage. Now these are our shift solenoids, so we're going to remove them next. Gonna pick them up, and they have 3 Torx bits in them. One here, and one here. But we're gonna pull our 3 Torx bits out that hold the shift solenoids in. And that allows that to just come off. We're gonna take the wiring harness out and around, and then we're gonna flip it over. And this is the connector that goes through the case of the transmission that your wiring harness hooks to. So this bolt right here is different from all other bolts. Also a Torx bit. And it's a specially made bolt. As you can see, there is a shank on it that allows this to pivot so you can move it around to get it up through the case properly. Going to turn this around, and next we are going to take this cage assembly off right here that holds the 2 springs in place that are up here. So you've got 1, 2, 3. So we're going to take the top and the bottom one off first. That's a pretty short bolt there. Flip it over. Take the bottom one off. That is a longer bolt. Goes through the bottom. And we have one more that's right in there. So as we remove that, we're going to hold on to this and catch the springs so they don't fall out. Going to block this up a little bit so maybe you can see it just a little better while holding in on the springs. So we're going to catch them so the springs don't go flying out. As you can see, here's one spring. We'll remove that. And here's the second spring. And we'll remove that. So here's your 2 springs. You got 3 bolts. All 3 bolts are a different length. So a short one, a long one, and then a medium size. As a little side note, you also have an adjustment screw head right in here. Takes an Allen wrench, and that's used to adjust your pressure with. So it will come out right here, and you want to make a measurement on this. Specifications will be given in your book as to where that should be adjusted to. Next, we've turned the valve body back over to the top, and we're going to remove the 3 to 4 accumulator cover. So you got 2, 4, 5 bolts in it. We'll be checking the lengths of them as we take them out as well. So all of those appear to be the same length. We'll just set them right here. Remove the cover. This cover only goes on one way. You want to check and make sure that it looks flat. Put a straight edge on it if you want to. Bring our spring out. And reach down in and bring the accumulator piston out. You've got two seals on them. Next we have our oil feed tube. So you're going to need to take these two tabs and bend them down because the oil tube has got to come out this way. So in order to be able to do that, just take your fingers and bend the tabs down. You have to get this one started. It's a little bit bent over pretty good. Alright, now that we've got those bent down, we'll just take our screwdriver and put it right in here and see if we can pop this out. Okay. And we're going to, before we go too far with it, we're going to go around and get the bottom one, ties up on it, get it out. Try to keep from bending the tube, and we'll go back up here and finish getting that one out. Now that that's out, we'll put it over to the side. Okay, at this point we're going to remove the rest of our Torx bits, and if you'll note, all of these Torx bits are the same length except for one, this one right here. It's going to be the tallest one, or the longest length of all of them. We'll just go ahead and remove all these bolts. All of these are the same length, and we're going to take the one that is the longest bolt out last, and if you compare it, you can see that that is longer than all the rest. We're going to remove the top section. We're going to flip it over. You'll be able to see all your paths that the fluid takes here. Notice that there is a little residue in here. One of the reasons you want to always take this all apart is to clean it out. It's very important for the valve body to be perfectly clean. This is our separator plate. I want to take it out and look at it. You want to make sure that it's nice and flat. No gouges, no nicks or anything in it that would cause a leakage. Under that, you will notice that we have our transfer plate next, and there is one ball right here. Need to pull that ball out, so make sure you don't lose it. Put it aside. I'm going to remove this, flip it over. You notice that you have a little filter assembly right here. And we will make sure that this is perfectly clean before we put it back together. And the last piece is the bottom valve body. And if you'll notice, we have 7 balls in there. Then we have one right here that is larger than all the rest. So note positions where they're at. Maybe a good idea to take a still shot with your telephone, with your camera, so you'll be sure and put them in the right place. There's also good illustrations that comes in with the book, the overhaul manual. Okay, so I'm gonna just dump all these out. One, two, 3, 4, 5, 6, and the largest one, which goes right here, number 7. Now we're going to continue later on with removing a lot of these valves, if not all of them, and checking to make sure that they're all working properly. This is the top section of the valve body. This is the top. I've got it turned upside down. I'm going to remove the 3 to 4 accumulator housing, and behind that housing we're going to have a spring in here and a spring right here that's going to have a good bit of pressure on it. So I'm going to try to hold them and keep them from jumping out and going everywhere, but we'll see how that goes. So I'm going to remove the 2 side screws and then the middle one. Okay. Okay, so that worked pretty well. I'll let the pressure off of this other spring. Okay, so it has a cap on it and have a spring here, a spring here, and then 2 valves here. And then I will take this one out and we'll clean all those bores out. I like to use brake cleaner to clean it with. I'm going to see if I can remove these 2 valves now that are behind those springs. See if I can very gently remove those. And I'm going to keep everything lined up just the way it came out. So there's that valve. The next one. Okay, there it comes. So I'm going to put them with their two springs. Okay. Then we got a spacer right here, a retainer spacer that's holding this one right here in. Put a rag over this just to see if I can keep it from flying out. There we go. There's the retainer for the spring. And here we go. So I'm going to pull the spring out. And we'll see if we can get the valve out. And here we go. And be very careful with these valves. Don't force them. Just kind of spin them and try to keep them coming out smoothly. We'll check all of these. We'll clean these. Relubricate them. Replace any that need to be replaced. Okay, so that's got the valves out on that side. Now that these valves are out, we're going to flip the plate over, and I'm going to remove the ones on this side. We have 3 screws here on this plate, and then we'll be able to access the valves on this side. So I'll turn it around here. Maybe you can see it just a little better. I have pre-loosened these screws because they're a little bit more than my drill will take off. They do need to be torqued when you're putting them back on. Again, don't know if these got some loaded springs in it or not, but we're gonna take this loose carefully to see if it's any pressure on it. And it does seem to have pressure on it. Okay, so that plate is loose, and we will pull these 2 valves out. Reach down in there and see if we can pull a spring out. There we go. And when you're going down in those bores, you need to be very careful not to scratch anything. Be very gentle. It only takes 1 scratch to ruin it. Okay, so looks like we've got everything out of this, both sides now. And I'm going to leave them sitting right here, and I'm going to take this and clean it up real good, and then we'll relubricate and put all those valves back in. The valve body is all cleaned up now. I've cleaned the valves, the springs, everything inside, blew it all out with the air blower, and I've also taken my ATF and relubricated the bores down in here and also the valves that are going back in. So at this time we're going to go ahead and start reassembling this section of the valve body, get it ready to go. And make sure the valves are seated all the way down. And the spring goes in next. Okay, I'm going to put the plug in on this one last. I'm going to go ahead and put this spring in. And this valve. Twisting them easy as you go. Don't force them. They will slide in. Okay. The next thing is going to be the plug for this one, and then our cover plate. So I'm going to put the cover plate in, get all the screws started. The holes lined up. Now all of the screws, I'm just putting them hand tight in. I will snug them up a little bit with the Torx driver, but I will come back later when I have it all assembled, and then we will put the torque wrench in. I have a torque wrench on it. These screws torque to 35 inch-pounds. Okay, so that completes that section. Okay, I'm going to turn it around now, and next we're going to put the valves in on this side. We have 3 valves that are going in. Again, I have already lubricated all the bores, and each one of the valves and springs, I've already put lubrication on that. And then we will proceed to put the housing back on for the accumulator. Okay, so we're going to put this outer valve in first. And then the spring goes next. In order to push this spring into place, I'm going to use this punch, and I'm going to push down on the spring. pushing it into the bore. I'm going to take a screwdriver and I'm going to push it in to the spring, holding the spring down while I turn this over to the front side and slip the lock place into position. Then I can pull it out to hold the spring in place. Now we'll put the remaining two valves in, here and here. The valve in, spring in. Valve in and the spring. Now in order to compress these two springs, I'm going to take the housing and I'm going to attach one end of the housing with one screw. So you can see I have one screw started. I'm going to tighten it up till it has just a little bit of space left in it. I'm going to put the cap for this spring on top of the spring. Push it down into place. With my thumb, I'm going to hold that one into place. I'm going to push this one down into place. Pull the housing over. Come across the top of the spring. Line my holes up. Start the next screw. Now all that's left to do is install the last screw. And I want to check down inside here just to make sure. I'm going to actually loosen it back up just a little bit. Making sure that all the springs are sitting flat in the bore. They look good. So I'll snug these up, have them ready to be torqued. And that completes the installation of the valves and springs on this side of the valve body. As a final step, we're going to torque all the screws. Got my inch-pound torque wrench, and they torque to 35 inch-pounds. And there's one. It's important to have the proper torque on all the screws.
Okay, now we'll flip it around and get the ones on this side. And the last one. So that completes the torquing of the screws in this section of the valve body. Next we have the transfer plate out of the valve body, and attached to it is a spacer plate which we're going to remove so we can clean it all up. So we've got some screws here we're going to take out. That is the top plate. We've got one more screw that's securing the spacer plate. And now we can remove the spacer plate. Notice you have your screen assembly in that. Put it to the side. And also you will note that we have one ball in the spacer plate here, and then we have one ball in the spacer plate here. So I'm gonna dump these out. Here's the first one. And then there's the other one. Okay, so now we can clean this all up and get it ready to go back together. The transfer plate is all cleaned up now, and also the spacer plate for it. So I'm going to reassemble it at this time. We're going to put our two balls in first. This is the number 9 ball. It goes right there. This is the number 7 ball. And it goes right here. Now we're going to place our spacer plate back on. Need to make sure that you've cleaned the screen out real good, and also make sure of where it goes back down in there. Not sure if you can see it or not, but there's a little mark right here on the side which is made from this little tip that's on the end of it. So we got to make sure that it lines back up in the proper position, or it won't sit properly down into the hole. Okay, so I'm going to hold that in position, and we're going to drop it back down on there. Making sure that it goes all the way down. Okay, next we're going to put the screws back in the plate. start them all first. Lining the holes up to make sure that everything looks straight with the holes. I'm going to snug these screws up. We'll finish up by torquing the screws down. Again, it's 35 inch-pounds. Okay, now the transfer plate is completed and ready to go back in. This is our last section of the valve body to go through, and these first three valves right here don't really have anything holding them in at this point. So we're going to go ahead and remove them first so they don't fall out while we're taking the rest of the valves out. First one is a switch valve, then you've got your pressure regulator valve, and then the throttle valve. So we're going to start at the switch valve and go that direction. Okay, and we're going to lay them all out in the switch valve. Pressure regulator valve. Throttle valve, and it has more than one section. So next is the spring on it. Keep all these in alignment. One more section to it. That's the last section of it. Okay. So it's got all three of those valves out. And next we'll move over to this section right here. The valve under here is going to be the shuttle valve, and then you'll have a governor plug, and then we'll have another governor plug over here on this side. But first of all, we're going to remove the bolts under this plate. And I'm going to turn it this way a little bit. You might not be able to see as well as you'd like, but got to get an angle to get these out. It does have a little pressure on it, so hold it so the spring don't jump out at us. Okay, there we go. Okay. Okay, the first thing we're going to do is remove our two governor plugs. Here's the first one. And there's the second one. Now we're going to flip the valve body over. We're going to remove the cover plate. Now we'll be able to remove the shuttle valve plug, which is located right here. It'll have a spring behind it. Okay, so there's the plug and the spring. We'll lay it out. And next we will be removing the shuttle valve. In order to remove the shuttle valve, you've got an E-clip that has to be removed, and then a spring that is holding that on. So, I'm going to remove the E-clip. See if I can get this where you can see it. I'm going to take the pressure off of that spring there. Remove the E-clip. With our E-clip off now, we can remove the spring. It has a little sleeve on it right there. And on the other end of the spring, it has another sleeve. So we'll put those together along with the E-clip. And now we should be able to push out the valve. Okay. Next we'll move over to this side and remove this cover plate. This is for the boost valve. Okay. This is the boost valve right in here. And this is a spring for it and a spring retainer. So we're going to remove the spring retainer next. Catch our spring. Lay them out along with the boost valve. the plug that sits behind it. Next, we're going to remove the plate for the throttle valve and remove the throttle valve. And there's our cover. That's our throttle valve and the spring. Next, we'll be removing our limit valve cover plate, our limit valve housing, and the limit valve is inside of this housing. And then behind that, we'll have some springs and our shift valve. So first, we're going to move the plate. And it is spring loaded. So be careful you don't lose your springs. Okay, so there's the cover housing, the limit valve housing, and inside here is your limit valve. Okay, I'm going to lay the 3 springs out. Okay, first one. And there's a second one. And that's got all our valves out of this housing, except for the manual valve. Well, we do have one valve left inside this housing, which is your limit valve. And you have a spring retainer right here. So we're going to remove that spring retainer. And be careful of spring popping out on you. Remove that spring. And that is the limit valve. We have one last valve in the section of the valve body, and that is the manual valve. We're going to take it out at this time. It has a very strong spring that goes in here for the that fits in all the indents in the lever on the valve. but we're going to attempt to take it out, as I wanted to have every valve removed from the valve body. So we're going to try to be careful and not lose this ball and spring. Well, that wasn't too bad. It did pop out, but it didn't get away from us. So now all we got to do is spin this to the side, and we can remove that valve. All right, so that's every valve out of the valve body. We will go ahead and clean all the valve body pieces, the valves, the springs, the plates, and then we'll reassemble it all and put the valve body completely back together and have it ready for installation back into the case. It's time to start the reassembly process with our valve body all cleaned up and our valves cleaned up. We'll begin to put it back together. So what I like to do is use a little ATF and also a little assembly lube. So let's begin. In order to put the lever into the valve, this needs to go inside that slot right here. So we're going to raise it up to a point where we can slide that in and then let the valve go back down into the cylinder. That way, as you operate the gear shift lever, that moves in and out. Now we need to put the spring and the check ball back in next. Slide the spring in first. I'm going to take a small screwdriver, push the ball up in place, put a little assembly lube on it. And hold it in place. Hold it in place with the screwdriver while we swing the arm around. Got it pushed back. We need to bring the arm around in front of it and gradually release the screwdriver, and it will pop into the first detent. Okay, next we're going to put the shift valves in, and I have them laid out in the arrangement that they go. So we're going to lube them up, and just like the other ones, we're going to put them in. Okay, there's first one. second one. Making sure that they seat all the way in. Next, I have the limit valve housing to reinstall to the valve body, but first we're going to have to put the limit valve back into place. So we'll do that first. Slide that in, the spring goes in last. Making sure it's all the way seated. And we will put our spring retainer back on. Pushing the spring in behind the locking plate. Okay. Now in that same housing we have the plug for the throttle valve. So we'll go ahead and put it in place. Make sure it's seated properly. So we're ready to put the cover and the housing back onto the valve body. We're going to get our screws that go in the cover. We'll reassemble the cover onto the limiter valve housing. And go ahead and start the screws through the holes. And this will be spring loaded, so we'll have to try to hold everything in place as we install it. Making sure everything is in place. And the last step after the screws are all seated is to torque them with our torque wrench to 35 inch-pounds. Okay, so that completes that housing and the valves. Next will be the throttle pressure valve. So we have a spring that's going to go in first, the valve, and a sleeve on the valve. So with that in place, we will put the cover back on. Snug it up. And of course the final step is to torque the bolts. Next, we're going to flip the valve body over, and we're going to install our boost valve, the boost valve plug, and the spring, and then the spring retainer. So we're going to put a little lubricant down in there. And the plug goes in first. Next goes in the valve. Then we'll put the spring on. I've got the spring on. I'm going to set the spring retainer down in the slot. Compress the spring. To where you can slide the retainer all the way down. So at this point, the spring is inside the retainer and the retainer is all the way down. Now we will put the plate over it that holds everything in place. and install the 3 screws. And finish up by torquing the screws down. And that completes the boost valve and spring installation. We're going to turn the valve body around. And this is our shuttle valve. It has 2 springs and a plug that goes on the end. So we're going to put this spring up in place first on this end of the valve body. Going to shove it down in there where this end of the valve can go through the spring. We'll put some lubricant. So we're going to push the shuttle valve in next. And then you've got to line it up with the spring so the valve will protrude through the spring. At this point, I'm going to see if I can push it far enough through to go ahead and put the E-clip on. So the E-clip is pushed completely down. Spring is in place. Now we can turn it back around. Put the last spring in. And the plug. Now we're ready to put our 2 governor plugs in. So at this point we're ready to put our plate on. And torque them down. And that completes the governor plug installations and the plate installation. Next we will flip the valve body over and we can install the plate that goes on the top. And torque them down. Okay, the throttle valve is going to go in first. The spring will go after that. Next will be the kick down valve, and it has a little slider piece on it. We'll make sure that the recess part goes on first on to that valve, the kick down valve. Okay, next is our pressure regulator valve. Okay, and then the switch valve. And that has all the valves back in place on this portion of the valve body. We have completed the disassembly of all the valves and the valve body's different sections of it. Cleaned all the valves up, make sure that they're all working properly. All the springs and valves have been back in place. And at this time, we are ready to start assembling the different sections of the valve body together. So the very first thing we're going to do is we have the balls that we took out of the upper section. So we're going to start by putting you've got one ball that is larger than all the rest. We're going to drop it in this hole right here that is, as you can see, is larger than all the rest of them. So we're just going to go ahead and put the other ones back in their proper positions. And that has all the valve bodies balls put back into place. You can see the position that they go in. Next, we have our separator plate. We've had it all apart, cleaned it all up. Notice that you have the little filter back into place. We have a ball that goes right here in this slot that we have reinstalled. And then you have a ball that goes right here in this slot that is under the plate. So we've reinstalled everything in the separator plate, and we're ready to position it onto the upper valve body. So if you notice that the filter assembly here is going to go right into this hole right here. So we'll just line that up and drop it in. And that will make our holes all lined up in the proper positions. Okay, now with this lined up and installed, we have one steel ball left to install, and it's going to go right into the separator plate right here. So we're going to drop that in. And then we're going to take our spacer plate, which will go on next, and if you notice it has a hole in it, that's where the fluid from the filter comes through, and you're going to line it up with this hole in the separator plate so you'll know how it goes on. So if you just kind of line those two holes up right there, that will cause the holes where the bolts are going to go through to be lined up. Next, we will take the lower valve body section, and again, if you take the hole right here and align it up with this hole right here, that is for your filter assembly. Then that will give you the proper alignment for the screw holes. Alright, so at this point we're going to install all of our screws into the valve body that holds it together. We're going to start out with our 3 right here that has the holder made on it for the tube. Might have to wiggle them around a little bit and get them all to go down in position. You just want to start them loosely, get them all started before you tighten anything down. If you remember, we had one bolt that was longer than all the rest of them. You can see the difference right here in the length of the 2 bolts. This long screw goes right here in this very top land. So we're going to go ahead and put it in there and position it and get it started. And then we'll go ahead and put all the rest of our bolts in. All the rest of the bolts are the exact same length. And then we'll get them all started. Now that the bolts or screws are installed into the valve body by hand, we want to go ahead and start the torquing of the screws. They're torqued to 35 inch-pounds, and you want to start in the middle and work your way to the outsides. Now that we have all our valve body bolts torqued down to 35 inch-pounds, we're going to reinstall the fluid tube that we removed in the beginning. So it goes right here into this hole and come around to the bottom side of it and make sure it goes into that hole. And then it's a good idea to just give it a little tap, light tap with the hammer. I use a plastic hammer. Make sure that it's seated properly. And then you can bend up your positioning tubes bracket back into place. That holds the tube from backing out. Next, we will install the 3 to 4 accumulator piston, and I have removed the 2 old rings on it, the Teflon rings, and we're going to be putting 2 new rings on there. They are a split type ring. They don't hook or anything, but that's the way they look. So they're 2 different sizes. The smaller one goes on the bottom. Just push them together, and then the top one is the larger of the 2. Make sure they're all seated down in place good. Going to take some assembly gel and put on the rings. And then it will drop into the bore and just push it all the way to the bottom. Then you have the spring that goes into the 3 to 4 accumulator piston. Now this is a new spring. This is the old one. I have elected to put a new one in. My understanding is a lot of times these old springs will break, and so I don't want to take a chance, and I'm going to replace it with a new one even though it's not broken. So that goes in there next, and on top of that you have your cover plate. So that will go on next. Just put it in position. Start all our screws. Snug them up and then tighten them to 35 inch-pounds. And that completes the 3 to 4 accumulator piston installation. Next, we're going to install our adjusting screw bracket and our spring retainer onto the valve body. So I'm going to take the spring that goes on the pressure regulator valve, and I'm going to put a little goo on it, and I'm going to stick it on there so it'll stay up in place. And I'm also going to put a little goo on the switch valve spring. Put it right there. And then your adjusting screw, same. Try to hold everything in place. This is kind of tricky. Got to hold the springs in place while attaching it to the valve body. And it's a pretty good sized spring on there. So I'm going to align the regulator, pressure regulator spring up. And while holding this all together, I'm going to push it up onto the valve body. And we're going to put a screw in the bottom side, which is the longest screw. Get that one just pushed in place. Gonna hold it together while flipping it around. And then we'll put a screw into the short screw into the top side. At that point it should stay in place. So you have your springs in, your adjusting screw here, and now we're ready to put in the center screw, which is your last one. As you draw in this center screw, it will draw the spring plate up into place. And then you can tighten the other two, the bottom one and the top one. Snug all of them up first. And then we'll torque them down. I'm going to torque the center one first. Then the bottom one. And flip it over again to get to the top one. And that completes the installation of the spring bracket. Next, we're going to remove the E-clip right here on the throttle shaft. It pops right out. And then there is a washer on that. And right here there is a seal in here that a lot of times will leak, so you want to be sure and replace it before you go back in with it. You can put a pick in there and just prise up on it and pop it out. Noting which direction the seal goes in. Has a lip, right, inner lip on this side of it with a space right in there. And that's the back side of it, or the side that goes down first. So we take our new seal and we're going to put a little trans lubricant on it. And put it back down over the shaft. You need to reach underneath there and hold it up on the shaft as it'll drop down a little bit. And push it into place. Once you get it into place, you're going to put your washer back on. And then your E-clip. So that has the replacement of your seal that goes in the throttle shaft. Next, we have a new solenoid pack that we're going to install. I think I might have mentioned it, but I like to replace all the electronics anytime I do a rebuild. So we're going to start by aligning this middle screw up right here. And it has 3 screws that holds it on. And one on the other end. It does also have a gasket that comes on that solenoid pack made on the back side of it. So we'll finish up by torquing these screws down, and they torque to 70 inch-pounds. And that has completed the installation of our solenoid pack. Now we're going to run the wire down here on the side of the fluid tube. I'll bring it around here. And put it in the notch in our plate. And then we'll flip it over and put the screw in the other side. Okay, I've flipped the valve body over, and this is the electrical connector end of the solenoid pack that we installed on the other side. And just as a note, there's a little tip right here that needs to go in this hole on the bottom of the accumulator housing. And then we have this special bolt that we took out with the protruded land on it in order to hold this on. So I'm going to make sure that the little tip is in the detent. Start that bolt and we'll run it down. When it's tight, it allows that connector to move a little bit. So as you're putting the valve body through the case, that it'll line up with the hole properly. And we'll finish up on that one with a torque of 35 inch-pounds. And that completes the installation of the electrical connector. Now I'm going to flip it back over, and a lot of times because of the new wire, it's stiff and all, just to make sure that everything stays in place, I'm going to put a little tie strap right over the end of this, making sure that this end is inside the hole here. And that will make sure that your wiring harness stays in place and doesn't get into any of the other parts of the valve body that could cause a problem. So I'm just going to run my tie strap right under here, pull it up through, and tighten it around the bracket and the tube assembly. And then I'll cut off the excess. And that completes the installation. The last thing we have to install on our valve body is the governor housing. Your governor solenoid sits right here, and then your pressure sensor sits over here. So they're all cleaned up, and I have purchased a new pressure sensor and a new solenoid. Again, I like to replace all the electronics in the valve body. And here's another good reason. If you see the new governor solenoid, you can see how much difference there is in how heavy duty the new one is as compared to the original one. So they're always upgrading parts, and you want to have the latest and greatest installed in your transmission. So I'm going to put a little lubricant around the seal on the pressure switch sensor. And we're going to push it into the housing. Till it's seated. And with our new pressure sensor in place, I'm going to put some lubricant on the new governor solenoid, the seals. And in the bracket assembly, you'll see that there is an area right here that slides right up into the groove in the governor valve. So I'm going to set the solenoid down in the housing. and you can see that it is in place. And when we put it into the pressure sensor, we got to make sure that these tangs go into the groove in the pressure sensor, like that. And then I'm going to turn it around. Once I get it all put up in place, kind of like to slide a couple of the bolts in. And then you can just take the top of the governor solenoid and ease it down into place till it pops down into place. And then at that point you're ready to put it onto the valve body. So I'm going to go ahead and put the other bolts down in it. I'm going to flip it over, see if I can hold these bolts in place. And I'm going to go ahead and drop the gasket on it. Now, this gasket will only go on one way. So there you have it, and now I can put it up on there and not worry about it, the alignment here. It will be in place. Now before I get too far along, I'm going to go ahead and make my electrical connections here. It's a little bit easier to do if you can kind of pull it up and get them lined up. And make sure that you don't bend either one of the tabs on the electrical connection. And when you get it in, pull on it, make sure that it is clipped into place. Okay, we're going to hook up the pressure switch sensor over here, which just push it down, and then you push the locking tab into place. And all looks good, so we're going to snug up the two smaller screws. They will torque to 35 inch-pounds. And then these other ones that are left will go into the case when we install the valve body into the case. So those are snugged up. Solenoid's in place, sensors in place. Check both the wiring harnesses. Two screws are tight. We're going to torque them down to 35. And now we'll remove the other 4 screws that we use for alignment, and we will be putting them in when we install the valve body into the case. So I'm going to go ahead and reinstall the parking pawl rod. So it just slips right down in there. And if you remember in the beginning, we had a little E-clip that we took off of it. So I'm going to flip the valve body back on its side. And we will put the E-clip back in place. and it pops right in there. And now we can put the valve body on our component table, ready for installation. So that concludes the component overhaul for the valve body and for several other things that go into the case. Now, as we're putting it back together, we will be putting new clutches and new seals in, some new bearings, and we will go over that in the next video session, which will be number 3, and that will be the completion of the overhaul. I want to thank you for watching, and please subscribe to my channel and hit the like button. That's what keeps me going. Thanks a lot.